Racing games have been around for a very long time, through different shades of paint with a variety of different styles and interpretations. Arcade races have dominated the racing game industry for decades, and recently, sim races have been running the industry wild. For some, players used to toss their cars around corners with ease, make use of vehicular combat, and nail big jumps without intense consequences, all while using a controller. Now, players are cautious with corners and drive with precision, tactically overtake opponents, and keep their cars in tip-top shape with sweaty palms gripping on the wheel of a virtual driving rig. But there's a golden era that doesn't truly feel appreciated in the racing game genre. The era between the arcade domination and the simulation fascination. An era that was experimental and stylish. An era that doesn't quite get the credit it deserves. An era so distinct and so lost to time. I'm talking about the semi-realistic driving experience that is the Simcade racer. Mixing the action-packed nature of arcade races with the details and grounded atmosphere of sim racers, a genre about style, identity, and the avant-garde of the racing world. Welcome to the Simcade hybrid. I'm a big fan of mixing up a formula and experimenting with different styles that may not be conventional, but add something new to the idea and also make for an interesting fusion as an alternative. That's what Simcade racing is to me. I like arcade racers, but rarely do I truly like a sim racer. I'm intrigued by aspects of sim racers, things like mechanical damage and the atmosphere of realistic racing, but that's usually exclusive to sim racers. I like the serious and somewhat dramatic tone of games like Project Cars and Assetto Corsa, but again, that's usually exclusive to sim racers. That's where Simcade racers scratch that perfect itch, by mixing realism with a bit of power fantasy and giving the illusion of realistic racing, while still feeling a bit flexible. Games like Drive Club, Grid, and the mainline Dirt games scratch that itch for me, bridging the gap between sim racer and arcade racer, blending elements of both to create something fairly surreal. That's kind of what Simcade racers are. They are surreal racers. It's the concept of semi-realism. But with there being many interpretations of Simcade racing, with some feeling more realistic or more arcadey, it begs the question, what racing games are considered Simcade? The first few that immediately come to mind are the Grid series, Drive Club, the Dirt trilogy, the Project Gotham Racing series, Tokyo Race Driver, Forza Motorsport, and the Need for Speed Shift duology. These games feel a lot weightier and require a bit more precision than your average arcade racer, without being too complex and too demanding like sim racers. A game like Drive Club has physics and handling that feels weighty and moderately realistic, and the game does require a bit more responsibility behind the wheel. But it's no iRacing or Project Cars in terms of the caution, consequence, and precision. Simcade racers require a bit more tactic than arcade racers, but aren't as tactical and technical as sim racers. Take a look at Dirt 3 compared to Dirt Rally, the rally-focused spin-off. Both games allow you to fine-tune the way your car works on the track, but unlike Dirt Rally, where tuning becomes a bit complex and technical, tuning things just right so that they don't make your car feel borderline undrivable, Dirt 3 is a lot broader with less settings to worry about and less factors that will render your car undrivable. But there's still the illusion of realism and having realistic options and control. And this is another thing I love about Simcade racers, although this is personal preference. I like it when a Simcade paints itself as realistic with these various tuning options, but even with a bit of tuning, the game can still feel fun to play without me panicking and being overwhelmed by the tuning menu. And Codemasters games during the 7th generation did this perfectly. It's all about the illusion of realism. This is where I want to pull Gran Turismo into the frame, precisely Gran Turismo 5 and 6, since those are the ones I know the most about. Gran Turismo is partially known for its infamous slogan, "The Real Driving Simulator." Gran Turismo is a Simcade racer trying to really sell itself as a sim racer. It's like Shift 2 with its life and death theme of racing, but really it's a bit lighter than what it's selling. Gran Turismo tries to make you feel like this is the real deal, which I guess is part of its charm, but it's really far from it. The handling feels sim-like, but the physics can feel arcadey, stiff, and when the physics freak out, broken. What makes Gran Turismo different from other arcade racers, as well as Simcade racers, is the focus on grounded and plausible racing, with technical details and vast tuning options with very stiff physics. Again, selling the illusion of realism. Simcades are all about style, unique racing concepts, experimental direction, and identity. Each Simcade looks, feels, and sounds distinct from one another. The sim-like atmosphere of Forza Motorsport feels distinct from the intense, life-and-death grit of Need for Speed Shift. The vibrant street action of Grid feels distinct from the similarly street circuit-focused unity of Drive Club. Dirt 2 and 3 feel very distinct from, well, Dirt 4, and the list goes on. Simcades mix the aesthetic and finesse of arcade racers with the details and reality of sim racers. There's a characteristic atmosphere with some thick artistic expression mixed with a slice of the technicalities and realistic consequences. My favorite example of this is Shift 2. Shift 2 is gritty, edgy, and dramatic in its aesthetic and style. It seems like a sim racer in how it seriously portrays and depicts the intensity and dangers of motorsport. But at the same time, the game feels aware of its cheesiness through its over-the-top depictions of vehicular violence and intense action on the track. There's always a perfect balance within each Simcade racer despite having moderately different handling models per franchise. Each Simcade game or series has varying emphasis on arcade and sim. Gran Turismo is arcadey but leans more towards sim. Grid is arcadey but only touches on a handful of sim aspects. Drive Club feels equally arcadey and equally sim-like, albeit without much of the tuning details, and the list goes on. It's that variable and experimental emphasis that makes many Simcade racers stand out from each other. They all have their own flair and identity, whether it's portraying the art of motorsports as something truly beautiful or as something intense and dangerous. But rarely do Simcade racers ever take the artificial and muted approach that sim racers do. It's kind of odd how a coherent and memorable style and identity is lacking from many modern racers. Every sim racer looks the same with its artificial and bare-bones presentation, while big-budget arcade racers are recycling earlier styles or just having an identity crisis altogether. It's a shame, since there are so many cool styles ripe for the taking in these respective genres of racing games. And the lack of quality Simcades these days is abysmal, even if you remove the quality as a filter. Why aren't there any Simcades is always a question I'll ask when I try out a new racing game, because I'm always craving the contained and compelling atmosphere as well as the sleek presentation of a Simcade racer, the surreal identity that subcategory has. But within the identity of Simcades, there's also this tendency of having this strange emphasis on a certain race type and terrain that is heavily overlooked in motorsport culture. Many racers have us tearing up the traffic-filled streets, getting dirty off-road, or staying on our best behavior on an official racetrack. But rarely is there a true representation and emphasis on street circuits. Also known as legal street racing, street circuit racing is not only a bit unconventional, but it also adds an interesting twist to the racing environment. Street circuit racing sees these modified, powerful racing vehicles compete on roads that aren't necessarily tailored for professional racing, with uneven layouts, worn-down terrain, as well as economical and urban backdrops. No racing game genre quite highlights the thrills of legal street racing the way Simcade racers do. Need for Speed and the crew focus on the chaotic, outlaw, and underground nature of street racing, while Project Cars and Assetto Corsa mainly highlight their officially licensed and artificial racetracks. But Simcade racers take the best of both worlds. The public and urban landscapes of street racers with the contained structure of linear track racers, making for a unique blend of contained chaos and thrills. Through these closed-off public roads, we get to speed through a diverse range of environmental backdrops, from the Sakura-filled mountains and lakes of Japan in Drive Club to the landmarks and beautiful sunsets of Paris in Grid. Street circuit racing adds a unique atmosphere and character to the racing. There's a sense of life and vibrance in the street circuit environment, whether that be the confetti and loud cheers on the outskirts of the track, or just racing through mountains and the countryside. In other words, street circuits allow for the backdrop of a racetrack to be a lot more notable, lively, and atmospheric. It's better than the rather static, empty, and distanced feeling and look of traditional racetracks. Let's take an example. Compare a street circuit environment to a racetrack environment in Grid 2, a Simcade racer. A racetrack feels a lot more static and soulless with a not so appealing backdrop. It's just you and the track. Meanwhile, a street circuit is brimming with life and an appealing backdrop. It's you, the track, and the environment. Even in a sim like Project Cars, the racetrack is soulless and the backdrop is drab. Yet the street circuits look far more appealing. I think you get the point here. Street circuits, as unconventional as they are, don't really get the love they deserve. But some Cades notice how underrated this type of racing terrain is, and they make it part of their identity. Pretty much every Simcade racer from Grid to Forza Motorsport, and even Gran Turismo, have some really great street circuits compared to sims like iRacing and Assetto Corsa. And I think that might be due to the fact that arcade races are usually associated with the streets. So, Simcade racers try to make the streets a bit more realistic or grounded. Simcades unfortunately feel neglected in today's market of racing games. Everything is one-sided, either fully arcade or sim, and everything is exhaustingly repetitive and just not that risky anymore. The moment Simcade started to dumb down and fade away, I knew something was very wrong. And I couldn't emphasize how correct I am in saying that. I mean, just look at every single racing game that has come out in the last decade. I don't mean to come off as someone who was blinded by nostalgia, but look at a game like Forza Horizon 4 and 5 and compare it to the first two Forza Horizon games. You'll notice that something is missing. Look at a game like The Crew Motorfest and compare it to Test Drive Unlimited 2. You'll notice that something is missing. Look at Gran Turismo 7 and compare it to Gran Turismo 6 or 5. You'll notice that something is missing. And what is that something that is missing? Well, a whole package of cohesion, soul, unmatched personality, and unique ideas. The first Forza Horizon is still one of the most soulful racing games I've ever played. Test Drive Unlimited 2 is still the most unique driving game I've ever played. Gran Turismo 6 is still the lost, great, and cohesive Gran Turismo up until now. Although that may be controversial to some Gran Turismo fans, but I stand by it. These three games came out between 2011 and 2013 respectively. It's been more than a decade since I've played a racing game that truly blew my mind the way these three games did. Everyone wants to go bigger and more ambitious, but no one wants to truly take risks and innovate on the racing genre. And because of that, the racing game genre has been stagnant for more than a decade. And so I asked this question: where the hell are all the Simcades? Grid Legends is cool and all, but where's my proper Dirt 3 follow-up? Where's my Drive Club 2, and why is Evolution Studios no longer in the picture? Where's my Shift 2 follow-up, and not whatever the hell Project Cars 3 was? Why the hell are modern racers so afraid to take risks? Some of you might say expensive budgets and changed priorities, and while that may be true, I say racing game devs are creatively bankrupt. There are a ton of cool racing game ideas that are just there for the taking, but everyone is just recycling the same formula and just expanding on it while also creating fatigue. It sucks. That's why the Simcade era and genre means so much to me. It was an era of standing out stylistically and mechanically. It was a surreal combination of arcade finesse and simulated technicalities. It was an illusional hybrid of two categories of racing games that have their own communities grabbing each other by the throats. But now, it's a subgenre in the racing game hemisphere that is losing its own existence and charm that made me fall in love with it all those years ago.